So you've all seen, you're all here because you saw Ron's qualifications on the publicity. He's a native son, born and raised in Oakland, and Maine. And he's a lifer, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service wildlife biologist, and has lots of wonderful tales of near-death experiences, you know, out in the wilds. But I want to tell you about how I met Ron. It was about it was 22 years
at least
ago.
Yeah.
And I had gone up to in the Carabasset Valley area and to take a birding course, a birding weekend with this guy. I had no idea who he was, but Ron Joseph, and we were all staying, the group was staying at Claybrook Lodge, which was wonderful.
Great place.
If we weren't birding, we were eating.
Yeah, Pat's a great cook.
And anyhow, that's how I met Ron. He was leading all these bird walks, and I was so excited because I was just learning my birds, and I just wanted to know everything. And so we were walking along with our binoculars, and I saw something, and oh, look, I think it's a blackpoll, which would have been a big, you know, excitement thing. And then I go, oh, it's just a chickadee. And Ron goes, a chickadee, excellent, excellent. Everybody look at the chickadee. Now,
I love chickadees.
Notice, you know, and he went, notice this and this and this. And he was so, and I was so embarrassed that I had said just a chickadee. And I've never said just anything again.
Oh, that's funny.
But you taught me a huge lesson, and that's who Ron is. Everything is important. Everything.
Yeah,
is
you enjoy what you see. You know that.
Yes.
I mean, I don't have to tell you that.
Without further ado.
Well, I couldn't resist the invitation to come. Chloe asked me like a year ago if I would consider this. I said absolutely. And then my book came out in the interim.
One more thing.
Yeah.
I told Ron, bring some of your books.
And I wasn't planning on it because I said it's not really a book presentation, so I won't bring any.
There's some in the back, but there are plenty more here.
But a lot of stories I talk about tonight, they're in the book. And I got sort of, that's a long story, but I got my arm twisted to write the book, and I did, and I'm happy that I did. But tonight I want to talk to you. Can we dim the lights at all? Will they dim? I grew up. I was born in Oakland, born in Waterville, and I took this photo a few weeks ago. This is from the Carter Memorial Bridge that links Winslow and Waterville. And I grew up, I was born in Waterville, spent 5 years there, and then we moved to the neighboring town of Oakland. So the Kennebec River, my point is, the Kennebec River has been central to part of my life for forever, since I was a kid. And I love the Kennebec River. It's where I worked as a biologist. It's where I recreated. And to see the river now restoring, and I call it a partial recovery, one man's opinion, my opinion, and that is the river from Waterville to Popham, Fort Popham. It's free flowing. Once the Edwards Dam was removed in 1999 in Augusta, we got these remarkable fish runs that come up the Kennebec, which I'll talk about. So I took this photograph from the Carter Bridge looking north towards Waterville. Let's see if I can get this to work. And now I'm standing at, in this photo, I took this photograph looking back at the Carter Bridge. You can see it. That line, my pointer's died, but I was going to show you, but it's through the trees. That's the Carter Memorial Bridge. I was standing on the left. This is Fort Halifax City Park in Winslow. And this is where the Sebasticook River comes in. The Kennebec flows this way. And you can sit there in May, as I've done, and see 3 million alewives now coming up the river because the dam in Augusta has been removed. It's like, give these fish a break and they'll come back. And we're seeing 3 million. Can you imagine that? It's the largest alewife run in North America. And sitting in those Adirondack chairs, you can see ospreys and eagles diving in front of you. So if you haven't taken the time to go over there in May to see this, it is really a sight to behold. And then you turn around the Adirondack chairs and you can see the first of 4 dams between Waterville and Skowhegan, which blocks the anadromous fish runs from getting further upriver. And the Sandy River, which is where my grandparents had a farm, and I'll talk about that. They had a property on the Sandy River, so it's a major tributary of the Kennebec. So I've been intertwined with the Kennebec ever since I was a kid. But this is the first obstacle upriver from the ocean, and the salmon and alewives can't get past this dam. Now, we talk about the Kennebec watershed. The headwaters are Moosehead Lake. I don't know if anybody has read The Maine Woods, Henry David Thoreau. Northeast Carry is here, and he took the boat all the way up to the tip of northern shore of Moosehead Lake, and then he crossed through Northeast Carry, which is what the Native Americans used, to access the west branch of the Penobscot. So here's the Penobscot drainage, here's the Kennebec River drainage, Augusta, Waterville, and here's the Androscoggin coming in. So this was my playground as a kid. It still is my playground. I was talking to this lady here tonight. I worked in Greenville for 3 years on Moosehead Lake, so I've worked in this region, grew up in this region, so it's very dear to my heart. So from Moosehead to Popham, it's 170 miles. Only about 67 from Waterville to Augusta is free-flowing. The rest of it is dammed. But it has a remarkable history. Champlain first explored the mouth of the Kennebec in 1605. And people really, you think of Jamestown as one of the oldest establishments in the New World, and it is, but you don't hear much about Popham. That was one of the first settlements too, but it only lasted a few years because it was so cold. They could not eke out a living, so it failed. But it's just filled with history, the Kennebec. And I'd be remiss if I didn't pay tribute to those indigenous people that came way before us, and that's the Wabanaki Federation. Names you still hear today, the Passamaquoddy, the Penobscots, the Norridgewocks, the Micmacs, the Maliseets. That's a good trivia question. How many federally recognized tribes are there in Maine? There's 4. The Micmac, Maliseet, the Passamaquoddy, and the Penobscots. They were here long before us. And in their language, the Kennebec means long, quiet water. But it's, as you can imagine, just like everything else in North America, they were displaced. And they lived pretty quiet lives for thousands of years. And then the French first arrived on the Kennebec. And faith, fish, and furs attracted the French to North America. They got here before the British. And if you have not been to this monument, I highly recommend you do. When you drive up through, maybe if you're on your way to Sugarloaf or something like that, you go through Madison, stop and look at the monument to Father Rawle. He set up a Jesuit mission, converted the Indians. That was his mission, to convert them to Catholicism. But then the British came in and they wanted to displace the French and the Indians, and they accused him, Father Rawle, of instigating an attack on Wells in 1703. So the British marched up the river to Norridgewock, murdered Father Rawle and a bunch of Indians, and then the rest fled north. So it's the history of violence along the Kennebec is just like the history of the violence towards Native Americans anywhere.
Where is that? Where is it?
Madison. It's in Madison, yeah. There's a road, if you look at Madison on a map, you'll see Father Rawle Road, and you just drive down there and you can find it. Fort Halifax, where I took the picture of the Adirondack chairs, this was built, there's a blockhouse there. It was built in 1754 as a front line of defense to defend the British interest on the Kennebec in the French and Indian Wars, and to promote settlement. this is the more famous one in Augusta, Fort Western, built the same year by Kennebec proprietors. The same goal as Fort Halifax, protect the British interests and spur settlement upriver. Now, there's a lot of books on the Benedict Arnold expedition. This one is probably my favorite. Others may have their own choice. But if you've not read this one, Through a Howling Wilderness, Thomas Desjardins. Benedict Arnold left Newburyport by boat, came up the Kennebec River, purchased bateaus in just north of Augusta in Vassalboro, and then made his failed attempt to conquer Quebec City. This book goes into great detail about this. So, like I say, the point is, the Kennebec is rich in history, rich in natural resources, and if you want more information, I highly recommend this book. You want me to leave it right there? Sure.
Kenneth Roberts' book, Arundel, is also.
Yeah, that's another great one. Yeah, Arundel. There's many out there.
You like this the best?
But I like this one. This is probably my favorite. Now, I write for Down East Magazine on assignment and Maine Boats, Homes and Harbor. A few years ago, they asked me to write a piece because they did an issue on 70 Mainers over 70 years old still working. And they asked me if I had a suggestion. I said, yeah, Wayne Bragg. He lives in Sydney. He's my neighbor. He's a farmer in Sydney. I got to talking to Wayne. Turns out his great-great-great-grandfather, John Bragg, started the dairy farm that he now has. The dairy farm's been in the family for 250 years. He got his land acquired from the Kennebec proprietors and started a dairy farm. He said, at the time, the lands above Augusta were often given to settlers for free because they were closer to the Native American villages and there could be battles. Below Augusta or downriver, they were sold, but they wanted that land settled. So his great-great-great-grandfather settled it. So I wrote a story about my neighbor, Wayne Bragg.
Honoring him today by the shirt you're wearing?
Yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. Great guy. Still, he's 70, well, he's 4 years older than me, so he's 75. His son has taken over the business, but great. Now, my roots go way back on the Kennebec, too. In 1794, Paul Yetton, my mother's great-great-great-great-grandfather, was a Revolutionary War veteran. As you know, after the Revolutionary War, the country was broke, so they gave a lot of veterans free land. And he got a plot of land in Belgrade, and he walked from Great Falls, New Hampshire, claimed his land, and cleared it. It took him 2 years to clear it before he moved his family up. And this is the home that his son, Paul Yetton, built in Belgrade. It was the Yetton Inn for many, many years, and now it's a private home. And this here is Florian Yetton, my grandfather. He living in the house that his grandfather built in 1823. And this is where I spent a lot of my youth, is on my grandparents' dairy farm, which I write about in the book. I loved it. I mean, what kid wouldn't want to be around workhorses, right? And my grandfather, this is him in 1913, harvesting ice. And I can remember him telling me stories of his grandfather harvesting scores of Atlantic salmon in the Sandy River. The Sandy River is the premier salmon spawning river in the state. But they can't get there because of the dams between Skowhegan and Waterville. There's 4 of them. So they can't. They have to be trucked upriver, which is, I'll get into that in a minute, it's unsustainable. But I just can remember, I love that photograph of him as he's sitting on blocks of ice, harvesting ice. And here's the ice house right here. And that's my mother's youngest sister, Maxine, with my grandfather in the mid-1930s. They had no electricity until the early 60s, no indoor plumbing until 1972. And he always had workhorses. And as a kid, my twin brother and I, we could not wait to get to the farm. We spent as much time there as we could. Summer vacations, school vacations, it was heaven. Now, here's something that most people don't realize. By the late 1800s, one of Maine's primary exports was ice. Kennebec River ice was shipped around the world because it was known for its high-quality, crystal-clear ice. It went to Egypt. Imagine that, Cuba. The first commercial ice house was built on the Kennebec in 1826. I don't know where Bernie Public School is. I was hoping maybe somebody in here would recognize it. But I'm guessing it's somewhere in the mid-Atlantic states, but I don't know. But you can see Kennebec ice. It was very popular, very, very famous ice. Now here's my grandparents' farm. I took this photograph with my first camera in 1972. I was a sophomore in college. And the reason I took the picture was the barn was just built. The old barn, the post and beam barn, collapsed. It's kind of eerie to think about. It collapsed a few months after my grandfather died. So my grandparents, my mother, I should say, and father built the barn, tore down the other one, saved as much timber as they could. But this is where I grew up, essentially, on my grandparents' farm. I loved it. Now, the farm is located on the Sandy River. This is the confluence of the Sandy River and the Kennebec. They were further upriver on the Sandy River. And that's where salmon used to congregate.
Can I ask something in that picture?
Yes.
So it looks like a Y to me.
Yes.
So can you address what those bodies of water are again, please? 'Cause to me
Sure.
it looks like three, even though I know it's not.
Yeah, the Kennebec's coming in here, and then the Sandy River's coming in here.
And so where they come together, what is that part called?
Called confluence. The confluence of the river.
And you
Oh,
can
the Kennebec.
Oh, the Kennebec, yeah.
see the confluence. It's shinier than
Yes.
the rest of the river.
Right.
Yeah.
And where does that meet?
In Starks.
Starks.
Yeah, the town of Starks. So my grandparents were upriver of that. So, taking you back to Waterville and Winslow, once the dam was removed in Augusta, the Edwards Dam, in 1999, those fish had access all the way up to Waterville. Lockwood Dam is the first one. In 2003, I think, the Sebasticook Dam right here was removed. So alewives can go up the Sebasticook all the way to Benton, but they can't get any further than this. And the Sandy River, we've known for a long, long time, is prime spawning habitat for Atlantic salmon. There's a falls in Skowhegan. I learned this just recently when I was writing a piece in Maine Boats, Homes, and Harbor about bringing salmon back. There's a fall there called the Great Gathering Place, Great Falls. And the gentleman I interviewed is 89. He says it's called the Great Gathering Place because that's where a lot of the indigenous people gathered in the fall because the salmon gathered there. And they could get up through the falls. But now they can't because of the dams. This is the Edwards Dam. It was built in 1837 in Augusta, 24 feet high, 917 feet long. So that put an end to the anadromous fish runs in the Kennebec. And it was dismantled in 1999. I think you said you had some photographs or
I televised it.
televised it coming out. Yeah, this is them breaching the dam now, and it was national news. This is one of the first major dams in the country. I had friends in Portland, Oregon. They called me and said they're watching it on TV, on national television. It was that big of a deal. So after the removal of the Edwards Dam on the Kennebec in '99, the Fort Halifax Dam, okay, 2008, I said 2003. The lower Kennebec has really surged back to life. That's why I call it a partial recovery. The run of alewives is the largest now in North America. 36 million have spawned here since the dam was removed. The great leaper, salmon, you know. I saw a bumper sticker quite a few years ago. It was on a Penobscot Indian vehicle at Indian Island. And it said, beaver taught salmon how to jump, which I thought that was great. I wish I could find it. I haven't been able to find it. But they are great leapers, and they can get past. You know, they can scale probably 10-foot falls, but some of these falls and these dams, of course, are so much bigger, and they've just driven to go upstream to spawn. And Chloe and I were talking about this before the program. The number of sturgeon coming back to the Cobbsaconi stream is stunning. And same in the Kennebec. How many people have seen jumping sturgeon? Okay, you haven't. Go to Augusta or Hollowell is a great place to see them. Pack a picnic, go to Hollowell in early June. They have a beautiful riverfront park in Hollowell with Adirondack chairs. Either buy some lunch in town or bring a picnic lunch and sit in those chairs, and you can see these gigantic sturgeon leaping in front of you. It is stunning. It is absolutely stunning. And they're both endangered species, and they've made a phenomenal recovery because the dam's been removed. Here are the alewives gathering at the mouth of the Sebasticook, spawning. And you swear you're in Alaska in May, late May? These great gathering of eagles? I've counted 78 eagles on the Sebasticook between Benton and the Kennebec River, which isn't that far, it's maybe 10 miles. And I'm sure I was counting by vehicle, 78 eagles, and a couple ravens here as well, but immature eagles, because the fish, the number of fish is just absolutely stunning coming up through there. So, Brookfield Energy's Lockwood Dam in Waterville, first of the 4 dams, just going to repeat myself here, on the Kennebec between Waterville and the Sandy River. The Sandy River is so important for spawning salmon. And over here is a fish lift to help the salmon and some of the alewives get upriver. But they can't get past this dam, and it's a... So they lift it up into these tanks, the salmon, and the state comes with a pickup truck with a water tank in the back that has an oxygenator, and then they flush the salmon into these tanks, and they truck them upriver. And it's, so here's the fish totals. I go by this, they know me so well, the dam keepers and the workers, that they see me come and say, there's no new reports today, because I go over there in the summertime. I go over there every day. It's from spring until fall. I'm there every day, just driving by. So I've got the latest current numbers as of October 25th, and they took the whiteboard down recently. But this year, because of the high waters we had, 158 salmon were lifted in the fish lift. But most of the river herring, there's 136 that they've taken up, but most of them have gone up the Sebasticook. They know to go up the shad, lamprey, eels. It's a sight to behold. And this is Jennifer Knoll from the Department of Marine Resources. I volunteered with Jennifer and her crew to plant eggs, and I've participated in some of these called trap and truck, from Waterville up to the Sandy River. The fish is being released in the Sandy River. So of the 158, I think 3 of them were too stressed to move, so they moved 155. But as I said, it's a tenuous life support system until we can figure out what to do about fish passage at the 4 Brookfield Energy dams between Waterville and Skowhegan. It really grates me. I find it so annoying that we can't get there. And then just beyond the Lockwood Dam in Waterville is another dam called Hydro Kennebec. And then the big one in Shawmut, just another 10 miles upriver, is the Shawmut Dam. And then the last one between the Sandy River and Waterville is the Weston Dam in Skowhegan. They can't, these are impassable for fish.
Ron,
Yes?
what happens when they've transported the fish above a dam like that,
Right.
like into the Sandy.
Right.
And then when it wants to migrate out, what does it do?
Right now, I understand that DMR, Department of Marine Resources, and the Fish and Wildlife Service have negotiated with the dam owners to shut the turbines down during the time that the fish are leaving, especially the smolts. The smolts are the 2-year-olds, which I'll talk about in a minute. But to keep the run going, we've been planting millions of salmon eggs in the Kennebec. These come from Penobscot fish at the hatchery. Catch them in other Penobscot rivers and some of the other river, and then spawn them at the hatchery at Green Lake. And then take the eyed eggs over to the Sandy River and plant them. This is a device here. It's a high-powered water pump, like a pressure, like pressure. Thank you, pressure washer, and it's digging out a redd. So it's constructing an artificial redd, R-E-D-D, which is a nest. Salmon use their tails to construct a nest in the gravel. Gravel bottom is what they want. So that's what this device here is doing, and then she is putting these salmon eggs into the depression in the substrate of the Sandy River, and then they hatch in the spring.
Will the salmon that are brought there like that know to return to that place, or will they go back to where their mama was born?
They know right where to go. They go back. They imprint right to this imprint, and they imprint by the smell. Isn't that amazing? And I'll get into that in a little bit. Each river has a distinct odor, and they imprint to that. So when they're in Greenland, which they are, when they're 2 years old, they migrate out, and if they survive, they get it to the west coast of Greenland. When they come back as 4-year-olds, they go right back up the Kennebec River and spawn in the same places that they were born. Yes?
You have a number up there?
Yeah. 7,500 eggs equals, you get 2 adults from 7,500 eggs. So the mortality rate's pretty high. I think I might have had, did I have something on? No, I didn't. Yeah.
And is that, I mean, yes, it's high.
It's higher than normal.
Okay.
Because they have to go through the dams. And that causes a lot of mortality with the smolts. Here's a smolt. They're in the river for 2 years. Once they hatch, the eggs hatch, and the young par stay in the river for 2 years, and then they go through a physiological change, which I'm not a physiologist, so I don't know, but it's called smoltification, where they can now, their kidneys can adapt to salt water, whereas before they can't. Can you imagine what the stresses are on the kidney, going from fresh water to salt water? So at 2 years old, they're ready to go downstream and to the ocean. So it takes 1,000 smolts to get 5 returning adults, because they are chewed up through the dams. Even if they don't go through a turbine, just the going over the spillway is enough to really basically disorient them, and they makes them easy prey for cormorants that are there by the dozens. Yes?
Can they not build fish ladders to bypass?
Well, that's it. I mean, we want something done. Yes, they could, but they're not going to do it on their own. It has to, what they're going to do is wait for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Their licenses are up for renewal, and then the agencies, DMR, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Marine Fisheries Service, can then stipulate, well, if you want the license to be renewed, you've got to do X, Y, Z for fish passage. That's how it was done on the Penobscot, and that's what we want to be done on the Kennebec. So, and I asked that question. You know, 2 dams, Chloe knows this. She's been involved with a lot of the work on the Penobscot. 2 dams have already been great works, and the VZ Dam have been removed on the Penobscot. And then fish passage has been allowed at a dam in Holland. So those salmon on the Penobscot can go way upstream to spawn. So I asked the question, why can't we have the same ecological blueprint restoration done on the Kennebec? And I haven't got an answer. No, not giving me an answer yet. When we know that the Sandy River is prime salmon respawning habitat. It always has been. throughout for centuries. They can get past up there, but they can't get past these dams.
So there's 3 dams blocking them?
4.
One I see, Lockwood, Hydro,
Lockwood, Hydro,
Salmon.
Shawmut, and then Weston. See, here's where it comes in.
Right, yeah.
So there's 4 dams.
So is the entire length of the sandy prime habitat?
Yes, prime. And unlike some of the Penobscot, there's a lot of dead water in the Penobscot. So that warms up quickly. That's what I mean. Dead water, I mean still. Here, it's highly oxygenated. It's mountainous. It's covered with, its canopy so it's got canopy closure, so it's cool. And dissolved oxygen is really high. And the substrate is ideal. It's all gravel bottom. So it's what you'd want in a salmon spawning river. So you asked the question about what happens to these smolts. Well, once they leave the sandy, they gotta navigate past 4 dams. And even though the turbines are shut off during their out migration, they still have to get over the spillways. And that's quite a drop. And if they lose a few scales or they get banged on the head by hitting a rock or whatever, they're injured. And the fish, bass, striped bass will eat them, smallmouth bass will eat them, any number of fish-eating birds, cormorants, great blue herons. So those that do make it out to the ocean at Popham, they migrate up. These are the smolts, migrate up around Newfoundland, and they spend the summer here, post-smolt feeding area, and then they winter up off the west coast of Greenland, and they stay there 2 years, and feeding on capelin and other small marine fish. And then at 4, they come back, and that's what the blue is. And they know where to go based on this incredible sense of smell, among other things. It's hardwired in their DNA. They know where to go.
Do big fishing trawlers or anything fish
Yeah,
for them when they're coming back?
Yeah, that's the other concern, is that there's a lot of fishing still going on off the west coast of Greenland. We do know that our fish are Maine fish, Maine's the only state left that has wild runs of Atlantic salmon. And we do know that some of our fish, because they're fitted with pit tags, transponders, you can actually can track them where they're headed. So we do know some of ours ends up in commercial fishing gear.
So have they been tagging fish from the Sandy River then?
Mm-hmm.
About how many?
That's a good question. I don't know what percentage they are, but quite a few. Quite a few of them have pit tags. So we know where they go.
So all these dams are for power production?
Power production, yeah. Yep. And ideally, I'd like to see them taken out, but we need electricity. I understand that. But we ought to have some way to put in some kind of fish passage so these fish can get past this. We're at point age where we have that know-how. Let's just go ahead and do it.
Yeah, but the electricity generated must be a very small percentage of
It is.
I mean,
It's a tiny percentage.
They look like low-head hydro.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a very small, and that's why the Sebastopol Dam came out, because it said it produced less than 0.1% of the state, something like that, of the state's energy. So said, let's take it out. I wrote a piece after volunteering for the Department of Marine Resources about Race to Save Maine's Wild Atlantic Salmon. It was in Maine Boats, Homes, and Harbors, and I was just so motivated by getting the word out that this fish needs our help. King of fish. At one time, up to close to 500,000 salmon spawned from Hudson River north into Maine. Of course, they go further north into Labrador, but in terms of the U.S., we had close to 500,000 salmon spawning back in historic times. Now, the runs are only in Maine, and they vary from a few hundred to a couple thousand. But for political reasons, and this is what I want to emphasize, I couldn't say this a few years ago when I was working for the federal government or for the state government, because I'd get in trouble. But for political reasons, Atlantic salmon are not on Maine's T&E list. They're federally listed, but they're not on the state list. And the reason is the state's frightened to get the aquaculture industry upset, get the power plant industry upset. So, and I'm not bad-mouthing Barrow's goldeneye, but that's a bird. It's a lovely bird. They don't nest here, never have. But yet they're on the T&E list, and so are golden eagles. I don't understand it. This species, above anything else, deserves to be listed on the state list.
What's T stand for?
Threatened and endangered species, T&E list. Now, this is where I wanted to be. When I found out it was going to be filmed tonight, I said, well, I want to be a little cautious, but these are their own words. I used to work in the endangered species program, and I don't know of a species that was more controversial when it was proposed for listing than Atlantic salmon. It turned ugly at the public hearings, and the politicians showed up en masse to voice their opposition to these public hearings held by NOAA, National Marine Fishery Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, and Senator Snow, when she was the senator, she's retired now, listing the salmon as endangered. This is her quote. Is nothing less than economic decapitation of a significant portion of the state. She's talking about aquaculture. King, Angus King, I think he's a good senator, so I'll give him that. But he said some things that I think he probably, or I would regret if I were him, that protecting the wild salmon under the Endangered Species Act will kill the industry, aquaculture, dead, dead, dead. Those are his quotes. I've said things I wish I hadn't said in my career, so I'm going to cut him a little slack. But he was wrong in saying that. I'll say he was dead wrong in saying that. It didn't kill it.
How would it kill it? Just explain the logic.
Well, the fear was that if it was listed, and it did get listed, that there'd be all sorts of regulations that would prohibit the aquaculture industry from expanding, and it would hurt. It would be a significant hurt. And the same thing we went through with Canada lynx. It was the same fear that Canada lynx, if it got listed, it would stop logging. And the fear was that it would stop aquaculture, and it didn't. What harmed aquaculture was the disease, fish diseases, from having too many fish in the pens. Ed Baum, who was the state's salmon biologist at the time, longtime state biologist, he disagreed with Governor King. And he said so. And then he quickly retired right after. He resigned because he said he couldn't take it. He said, you know, this is a business industry plan. He's talking about because all the politicians were saying, we've got our own plan to protect salmon. We don't need the federal government to list it as endangered. And Ed Baum is saying, that's baloney. It's not a plan to save salmon. So he promptly retired. Now, we can all think about people that we looked up to and visionaries, and I think Percival Baxter was one. I think he's well known, as you probably know, for using his own funds. He went to the legislature as governor to see if he could get money, raise money to buy Baxter State Park, buy Mount Katahdin. They said no, so he used his own funds. But what people don't realize, and this came up in November during our vote, right? He also had the foresight to know that hydroelectric companies, namely CMP, established in my hometown, Oakland, in 1899, would become monopolies, profiting to the detriment of the Maine people. Imagine that. That's why I say he's one of my heroes, Governor Baxter, for saying that. He tried to convince the legislature to establish a publicly owned and operated utility. Sound familiar? We just voted on it. Today, Brookfield Energy is owned by Wall Street investment firms, Bank of Montreal, Royal Bank of Canada. You think I have to ask the question, rhetorically, you think they care about Maine salmon, Maine anadromous fish? Or Maine? Central Maine Power, which started, as I said, in my hometown in 1899, Oakland. They're owned by Avangrid, which is owned by Iberdrola, which is an energy conglomerate in Spain. They don't care either. So I was really annoyed by all these commercials. All of them repeating the same line, 13 billion it's going to cost, you know. The rivers are publicly owned, yet businesses are profiting from that, and we're getting nothing.
Because we know how you voted on the referendum.
Yeah, you do. I didn't think it would pass, but I says this is a protest vote. That's why I voted for it. It just really angers me that these are publicly owned rivers and we're at the mercy of internationally owned energy firms. So, I've had a great career. I'm going to wrap this up pretty quickly here. I've had a great career as a wildlife biologist, working in Maine, born and raised in Maine, got a job here, and I worked all over the state. I loved it. You know, with bear cubs, I got to work with lynx. I was here when the eagles began restoring the eagle population back in the 70s when we had a couple dozen pairs. Now we've got like 800 pairs in the state. So I wrote a book. I wasn't going to, but I ended up writing a book. It was published by Allingport Press in May. And this is the Hermit Bill, who's in the title of the book. I found his diary. He died in 1958. I never met him, but I heard so many stories about him when I was younger that I said someday, I kept writing notes, and then later I said, I got to write a piece about this guy. He was remarkable. So he's in the book, as a chapter on him in the book. I've recreated in the upper Kennebec River. This is the cabin I've used since 1967 when I was 15. It's heaven. You know, that's where I see my first moose. My first lynx, Canada jays, you know, you feed them out of your hand. I mean, it's just, I can't tell you how much I love the Kennebec and the upper Kennebec, in the state for that matter. And I go up to this cabin year round. It's not winterized, but we've got a nice big stove in there now, and it's heaven. In fact, I'm going up this weekend, and I'll be up there next month and in January and February. You got the most beautiful sunsets, and it's where I learned to call moose with Greg Drummond, Claybrook Mountain Lodge that Chloe talked about. And it's a thrill to see a moose come respond to a call. I mean, it is. We've called dozens of moose during the rut. It's look at this one, showed up. Greg, you can't see Greg's, but he's got his megaphone right in his hand. And his moose has got vines all over his antler. It's like, you're not a cow. And if you haven't been up to the upper Kennebec, I strongly encourage you to. Anybody recognize this spot? Chloe does, probably.
Is that Bigelow?
Yes. Thank you, Chloe. That's Flagstaff Lake, Bigelow, one of the headwaters of the Kennebec. It flows into the Dead River, which flows into the Kennebec and the Forks. So it's part of the big Kennebec. So with that, I'll stop and entertain questions. I think that's my last one.
So,
It is. We can put lights on if you want.
okay. My question is, you've been here all your life.
Yeah.
The river is a bit cleaner now than when you were a kid.
That's an understatement.
But climate change has happened.
Yeah, I will.
What would you say overall is the health compared to when you were a kid?
Oh, immeasurably better. In the 50s, I was born in 1952. I can remember going down to the Kennebec in, well, earliest memory, and it was an open sewer in Waterville because you had the mills. You had Hollingsworth and Whitney, which later became Scott Paper Company, Hathaway Shirt Factory, Wyandotte, plus the municipalities that just dumped the raw sewage into the river. You didn't want to be anywhere near the river. That's why if you get on the river in Winslow, there's a boat launch there, and go all the way down to Augusta, you think, God, why aren't there houses here on the river? Nobody wanted to live near the river because it stunk, and it was horrible. But today, because of our Senator Muskie passed the Clean Water Act in 1972. He was instrumental in passing that because he grew up in Rumford on the Androscoggin, which had all these paper mills. He wanted to do something about it. So Maine's own Senator Muskie we can thank for the Clean Water, passing the Clean Water Act. And the rivers are, it's night and day to see the rivers today versus when I was a kid. You know? Yeah, night and day. Plus, the pulp runs, you saw the picture of the men in the bateau with the logs. I can remember when my father would go up to the upper Kennebec to fish, and we couldn't even put a boat in because the rivers were choked with logs, pulpwood. So that's changed. Yeah, so it's greatly improved. But further from Waterville up, the river is it's hurting. It needs help. It really needs help.
So who's going to make a case? When are they going to have the FERC hearings to?
Good question. I don't know when the licenses are up for renewal.
It must be reasonably soon.
Well, I think they're 15 years, but I'm not sure. I think they have to renew them every 15 years.
So who's active?
If you look at NRCM, Natural Resources Council of Maine, Atlantic Salmon Federation, Maine Rivers, there's a whole list of them that are suing, you know, to get this some kind of fish passage provided in these facilities, because the salmon will take off. We have proof. Look at what happened when the Edwards was removed. Look what's become. Now we've got the largest alewife run in the country. All I got to do is you give them a chance. The fish are resilient. Wildlife's resilient if we give them half a chance. Yes.
Are you familiar with waterways that are, say, from here to Machias?
A little bit.
Because I just offer that I hear the stories you're telling about when you were a kid, and I remember when I was a kid, we would sit there and watch on the Narraguegas.
Yeah.
And people would come from
Yes.
all over.
Sure.
I mean, it was a social outing as kids to watch.
Did you grow up in Cherryfield?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a salmon that my family doctor gave me. He caught in the Narraguegas pool, the famous pool. You had to take turns in this pool in the
Yes.
Narraguegas. You went either clockwise or counterclockwise.
Yes.
And he caught this 27-pound salmon. He had it mounted, and when he was dying, he gave it to me. And I donated it to the Maine State Museum. I said, you know what, this is an example that, I mean, I shouldn't have this. It should be part of the museum. So the Maine State Museum has it now. But this is a 27-pound salmon that was caught in the Narraguegas.
Well, what's interesting is just this week, the town of Cherryfield voted because they have a dam.
Yeah, right.
And they have now voted, and there's a grant they're going to be able to get to change that and bring rocks in to
Yes.
do what dams
Correct.
supposedly did.
Correct.
So that they're really, you know, the town is going to, same thing you're saying, the alewives there are
Yeah.
just thick,
Right.
and they're like, the fish need to return, but it's been 30 years in the making to get to
It
this
is.
road.
It's slow going, but we stick with it. It happens. It takes a long time to get people to change because people don't like change. Another one I think about is the Addison tide gates. I don't know if you've been up to the Addison tide gates. They're one of the last places in the east that we still have tide gates. I mean, those should come out, and they won't. I don't know if you know how a tide gate works. It's a flapper valve. When the current is going out, the flapper valve opens up to let the water flow from, I forget what river that is. But then as the tide comes in, the valve's shut. So basically what they've done is they've taken a salt marsh upstream of the flapper, the tide gate, and converted it from salt marsh to freshwater marsh. And we've argued that this is, freshwater marshes have value, but saltwater marshes probably more so. And we can't get the town to take that out. So, I mean, it was tooth and nail.
Why did they put it in?
Because they thought it would control flooding, which really hasn't controlled flooding. But the idea was they didn't want the salt water. I mean, marshes have a really bad reputation. Let's put it that way. It smells and all this stuff. So that's one of the reasons they put it in. It's been there for a very long time, but I think it's the only one I can think of in Maine that's still remaining. The others have all been taken out.
Do you think there's wiggle room in the temperature rising, that I understand salmon don't
Correct.
like warm water.
Correct.
And you're talking about the Sandy River. Is the Sandy River warming up to the point where it's going to be a problem for
No,
the salmon?
no, not as long as we still have forested canopy along the edge. That's why the Sandy River is thought of as like a refuge, and it will be into the future. Whereas the Penobscot, it is getting warmer because there's a lot more, as I mentioned, dead water, and the river is warming for sure. But the Sandy is mountain. It tumbles down through mountainous region of western Maine, crystal clear water, very cold. It's ideal. It's ideal for salmon, and I think it will be as long as we can. The important thing is to keep the forest cover along the river, especially along the river, because shade is very important to keep these streams cool.
So, remember that power line they wanted to go down past
Yeah.
Massachusetts?
Right.
So I had heard that the Canadians are building hydroelectric dams all over up there
Yeah.
in order to supply.
Yeah, they have. Hydro-Quebec has these gigantic. They have so much. They're producing so much energy they can't use it all. That's why they want to transport it and make money. But what I've heard is that it's stalled again because while this was going through the DEP process, they got shut down for about a year, and then this Maine State Supreme Court ruled in favor of CMP to continue it. In the interim, the prices have gone way up. Pandemic hit, prices have gone up. So now I've heard that they're renegotiating the contract with Massachusetts because the energy is going to go to Massachusetts primarily. So I've heard that they're trying to renegotiate the contract and get Massachusetts to cough up more money for it. So
That was another advertising.
yeah,
lies to
absolutely.
How it's gonna benefit.
Well, I was one of the expert witnesses at the hearings. I was opposed to it. I didn't see it as green energy, and Maine was getting virtually nothing from it. And I was actually kind of angry with Governor Mills because she approved of the project before DEP even had a chance to rule on it. She was in favor of it. She said, well, if we'll take $250 million as mitigation, we'll let it go through. Her own agency hadn't even finished their review. So what does that tell the biologists that are reviewing it? Prove it. I was pretty mad at her for that. I give her high marks, but I was pretty angry with her for that. Yeah. So it's stalled right now. I'm sure it'll eventually get built, but it's stalled.
There is some construction going on.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they had a lot of construction going on. Then it was shut down. But I was kind of surprised this summer that it hasn't picked up again. And then I heard the reason why is the cost of the steel. These great big huge towers, it's really gone up. So they're trying to get Massachusetts to renegotiate the contract.
So you think those dams in Canada are causing problems for all this?
No question, absolutely. That's why I say it's not green energy. Look at those dams. Hydro dams are enormous. And caribou, you remember the big massive die-off of caribou? They tried. Their instinct is to migrate these same trails that they've used for thousands of years. All of a sudden, they've got to get across a waterway that's miles long, and then the winds came up, and thousands of them drowned because they couldn't. And then the mercury levels. Say nothing of that. The mercury levels in these hydro dams are huge. We know it from dams in Maine that mercury as a neurotoxin is high in dams. And same thing in Quebec at their huge dams.
So there go a lot of the loons.
Yeah, exactly. Our loons are really suffering because of mercury. Yeah.
Where does the mercury come from?
It's atmospheric deposition, most of it, from the upper Midwest, coal burning fire plants. Ohio River Valley, huge smokestacks. The prevailing winds are west to east, and they fall out. We're called like the tailpipe, exhaust pipe. It lands here. It's called atmospheric deposition.
And it washes into the dam?
It falls out and it ends up. And the problem with the dams is that a lot of these dams, these lakes, like Flagstaff, has high mercury levels. The water level fluctuation, you draw them down and you expose the mud flats, and that takes mercury what I understand, methyl mercury, because you've got oxidization going on, and it converts it from an inert, not a problem, to a problem, methyl mercury. And that's what gets into the fish, gets into the loons, and it's a neurotoxin. You know, the Mad Hatter. You've all, you know, read Alice in Wonderland. He's mad because what went onto those hats? Mercury. They used mercury to treat the hats, so it made him mad. You know, and hence the Mad Hatter. It's a neurotoxin, and it makes loons mad. They go crazy. You know, they fight with each other. They stop incubating eggs, and it's worse. It's worse in hydro storage facilities, especially Flagstaff. Flagstaff has got some really high mercury levels. It's because of the water level fluctuation. We go from anaerobic to aerobic, and it converts it to all of a sudden all that exposed mud. It gets oxygenated, and then the mercury undergoes something called methyl mercury.
I'm wondering if you could comment just briefly on the changes in wildlife you've noticed in your career with development,
Yeah.
climate change.
Well, plus and minuses. Moose populations when I worked in Greenville were enormous. I mean, we had a huge population. Now, because of climate change, the moose population is tanking to the point where I'm not even sure we should have a moose hunting, frankly. Winter ticks, you know, some of these moose carry 50,000 to 100,000 ticks on them. I mean, that's a lot of blood sucking, and then calves can't take it. You know, they don't have the body weight or the fat or the blood to withstand it. So it wasn't that long ago we had 70% mortality rate of calves in the wintertime once because they had so many ticks. Well, a population can't sustain itself when you have, you know, a calf population that's undergone 70% mortality. And the problem is the winters are shorter. Ticks get established in October and November. They quest, they hatch in the summertime, and they actually, the little larvae link themselves and they climb up onto the red osier dogwood, and by the thousands, when moose goes by and they get on the moose, and they stay on that moose all winter. And they grow and they feed on the blood of the moose. And so that's if it was snow on the ground in November or October, that would reduce the questing of baby ticks. And then on the other end, if the ticks drop off, which they do in the spring, if they land on snow, their survival rate decreases. But if they land on foliage, their survival rate increases. And as the winters are shorter in the spring and they land on leaf duff, they survive to lay their eggs. So it's a double whammy for moose. And we've seen, I've seen a big decline in the moose where I have my cabin. Just don't see them anymore. Whereas in the 80s, they were everywhere. You know? You could see them, I could take people out to see moose on any given evening, and not now.
Well, Ron,
Yeah.
we could go on all night
We could.
with your stories, but
We could.
there are plenty more books, not just those 4. I want to give everyone a chance, if you want to buy one. And
I'll sign it if you'd like.
Sign it.
Yeah.
The book is so amusing and entertaining because it's full of these stories. They're all short, episodic
Yeah.
stories of his life in the wild, you know, and very enjoyable. They make great Christmas presents.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.